Alrighty. I think the time is nigh and it's about time we get this show on the road. I appreciate everyone for taking some time out of their day today. Get ready, homesteady. Let's go. It's time for us to talk about some homesteading opportunities. I'm Sage Dennis and I'm joined by my colleague Kegan Hilaire,
Hey,
and
everybody.
we are both small scale diversified consultants on the Rodale team. Just some quick Q&A or housekeeping, I should say. Please, if you can't hear me, raise your virtual hand so we can know. If you happen to have any questions, put them in the Q&A chat. I have the attention span of a goldfish, and the chat bubbles will distract me. And actually, our colleague Ben Lehman is going to be moderating the chat as well. And if you appreciate any of these crazy ramblings or anything, please feel free to check out the webinars that are on our website. We have a lot of great material on there as well.
So, like Sage said, we are part of the small farms consulting team here at the Rodale Institute. If you're not familiar with Rodale, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based around organic research. So we do a lot of conventional and organic side-by-side comparisons. We do a lot of organic practice trials. We have a farmer training program, and one of our newest ventures is the consulting team. Our consulting team is based across the country. You can see the stars on this map here. There's actually more consultants added since we made this map, but there's also now an entire markets team dedicated to helping the farmers that we transition to organic to find a market, but also help the market to find the people who are growing it. So we help farmers with technical assistance, focusing on social fairness, soil health, animal welfare, kind of the three pillars of regenerative organic. We do that providing technical assistance. Originally looked at it as almost like a organic extension, and then help translate some of the research that we do on farm into manageable and digestible things for busy farmers. We do a lot with trying to network and connect our local agricultural communities, and then obviously all the educational resources that we have, whether through the Rodale Institute Farmer Training Program, RIFT, through our actual research team, or just through the consultants with trials that we've run with farmers or for farmers or on our own. So yeah, we're kind of, so it sounds like a lot of things, but it's because we do a lot of things. We can kind of help farmers with any aspect of technical growing, top to bottom.
And with that, as we have kind of developed our services and kind of gotten comfortable in navigating, I would say the small farmscape for Kegan and I, we started to notice that a lot of the individuals, or a fair number of individuals that were reaching out to us, were doing so less so as a business opportunity and more so as a way to kind of develop some amount of independence from this food system, or to just like more effectively utilize organic farming practices for their own means. And as we kind of navigated that and were working with homesteaders more and more, we understood that there were a lot of values that were similar, but there were some important perspectives that required a different viewpoint, if you will, which kind of brought us to this conversation today. And the way we're kind of going to do that is in three sections here. We're going to do the obvious, the who and why, or like the what are we, just so we can get everyone on the same page. After that, we're going to be doing a farm tour where we're going to be able to look at different types of farming systems at scale, or at various scales, pardon me, and kind of work our way back to looking at that paradigm of the efficiency needed within larger operations and the sufficiency mindset that we homesteaders are like more trying to adapt to. So what makes us? Normally you have to pay someone to ask you that question, but no, realistically, what makes us? Identifying our direction and capacity to manage our ambitions. That's a really political way of saying like, what do we want to do? You know, who are we? Homesteading typically has some type of stereotypes associated with it, but we're here to try and break that mold because like yes, there's certain attitudes that are commonly adapted, but I'd like to pose it in the form of a question. You know, do you see yourself as part of the natural world, or do you more so see yourself as a separate entity that simply exists within it and sees it as an opportunity to use it? You know, there is some there's an understanding that we are looking to achieve this symbiosis, and in this symbiosis, we're going to be achieving a freedom, and that freedom is ultimately what we're going to want. And if you are already homesteading, I know you've already asked yourself these questions, and if you're thinking about it, well, let's get some homework. Or time to do some homework. What do you expect from this lifestyle? This is kind of what we've already discussed. Like, why are we here? What do you want to do? Do you want to break free from the farming system, from the food system? Do you want to have some amount of independence? You don't need a scale. You don't need acres. Okay. You don't need to wear overalls. I did this in the back of my apartment with a couple tomato and pepper plants for years because that's all I was able to do. Determining your needs, if we want to look at it from a very literal perspective, you got 720 to 750 calories you can break down, and however you want to split that difference is how we're going to be homesteading. I don't think anyone here is necessarily too excited to be growing and eating an acre of soybeans, but that's an easy 2 million calories right there, you know? So I guess it bodes the question, how do you realistically wish to achieve this? You're going to want some vegetables, you're going to want some chickens, maybe you're going to get some pigs, and before you know it, like this simple way of living has become pretty complex. And that complexity is is where I feel like a lot of us find the security that we ultimately aspire for in a homesteading system. The simplicity in our lives is what I hear a lot of people kind of say when I ask why do you do this? But I think complexity is not the best way to represent ourselves because this is a simple lifestyle through a very complex managing of a system. It's a humble lifestyle, is how I think of it. Like it is a simple lifestyle through complex management means that we have a humble lifestyle. And the irony of saying that we are humble is not lost on me right now. I am fully aware of that. And then lastly, and I think this is where Kegan and I struggled initially, was establishing this value because this value is where we ultimately differ from the rest of the farming system. For us, for an agrarian, for a homesteader, that value is less capital based and more so what provides you that sense of fulfillment. Is I guess establishing that currency rather than it be cash, it is time. Because with that time, you're able to do more. And by doing more, you're able to feel more fulfilled in the lifestyle that you are living. And in doing so, I always want people to be aware that if you are a homesteader, you are farming, but not all farmers are homesteaders. The moment you take a seed and you put it into the ground, you are committing to a marriage, for better or worse. The better is going to be a ideally fruitful harvest. The worse is going to be getting to the point of that fruitful harvest because there's a lot of hardships that we are going to have to deal with. There are those that are in and outside of our control. The nutrition and the pest and disease pressure we may not be able to control initially, but we can work our way and build a cultural landscape to kind of prevent some of these issues. But we're still going to be contending with forces outside of our control, and that's still going to put a burden on us more so than I would argue some farmers may have or not, because we are in this to break free of a system. This is making us solely responsible if we so choose to commit. Like that will make us responsible for these failures or not. Like there is a powerlessness that can come with that, but there is a unending well of empowerment as well. And that success or failure determines like the ecstasy in which you will achieve. But beyond this, like it's hard because you can lose yourself in this lifestyle because it's fun, but it's tricky because there's so many ways that you can invest yourself. And by doing so, you may not realize that you are ending up isolating yourself from the comforts that you've once, reconciled or that you have not reconciled or not willing to give up, or those that you have been able to speak with, or those that you have been able to maintain a relationship simply because you do not have the time anymore. And of course, with that, you have the financial uh stresses as well because we do live in a capitalistic society. I've heard it more times than I can count that the moment you finish homesteading is the moment you have a child. Because there are emergencies, there is debt, and there are resources that you need to be able to access at a moment's notice, and you may not be able to have that flexibility.
And on this slide too, I will say that again, we use the definition that anyone intentionally growing anything for their community is a farmer. So, like Sage said, if you're in an apartment growing tomatoes, or if you're actually rotationally grazing livestock through your perennial orchard and also veggie farming and canning and all of those other things, still is definitely still counted as a farmer. And with that, your farm operation will be one aspect within a larger system of your homestead. So all of the things that apply to small businesses apply to small farms, and all the things that apply to small farms apply to small homesteads because you are kind of a micro farm within a larger system. So establishing your currency and being able to track that, like Sage said, it might take a year or two, or in a normal financial sense, 3 to 5 years for a small business to become profitable. Now, since we're not talking specifically about hard currency, whether your currency is time or fulfillment or providing all your food needs, it some of those are a little quicker than others. But again, knowing that this is an investment into a long-term project, this isn't something that you kind of just raise a bunch of chickens and then sit on them in the freezer for a long time. That might be fun one time, but it's not necessarily a sustainable way of doing things. So understanding that your currency, again, may take a little bit of time to build up because systems aren't in place yet. Things aren't working like you expect them to because they're just kind of getting their feet on the ground.
And as Kagan had mentioned, those systems and those frustrations and hurdles that you are trying to overcome are the same ones that we are able to help assist farmers with throughout their process. That is why we are here, and that's why I feel like we are able to have a unique perspective and to being able to speak in terms of some of the efficiencies that homesteaders are able to adapt to, simply because the systems that we have come to did not have some of the flexibility that we may have here. That does not mean that it is any easier or harder. It is just a different way of managing the outcomes. And with that, we wanted to be able to kind of show you what some of these different scales would look like. And so you're able to better take some of these aspects and hopefully incorporate them into your system. The first of which is going to be garden or outside crop production. Regardless of the scale, you're going to know how to manage your water. You're going to need to know how to address your temperature for hot and cold, because it was warm, it was warm, it was warm, then it was wet here in central Pennsylvania, and now it's going to be dropping down to 30 degrees in the next day or two. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. And of course, with that, you have other factors such as those you can see, the pests, those you can't, the fertility, as well as the soil health, and also knowing that your operation is going to grow and design your operation with the ability to do so. When it comes to tools, there's just certain categories. There's a whole myriad of like tools that we could talk about, but that is not the point of this presentation. It is to help consolidate and simplify the systems that you are going to need to flesh out in order to effectively manage each of these operations or branches of your operation. Some amount of bed prep or cultivation. If you're doing no-till practices, a broad fork and a tarp is totally sufficient. If you are able to disturb the soil, some amount of tillage or soil disturbance, and then following up with a tarp is a great way of doing it. Beyond that, irrigation. How are you planning on watering? Have you tested your water? Do you know it's safe? Are you stuck on city water like myself? Pest management, understand what's in your area, understand who's growing what in your area. And then when you run into those hurdles, or when you are looking at expanding or growing or reevaluating your systems, understanding that scale is not always a bad thing, but it is simply an opportunity for us to reevaluate. But I want us to take a moment here to look at some of the investment it takes just to get to a point where you're able to put something in the ground.
So there's a few pictures here that I kind of just wanted to talk about. They seem pretty simple, but they tend not to be. So just kind of like looking at the picture and working our way back. This first one on the left is at my farm, Blackbird Farms, where we're planting onions. It looks pretty simple, but this is getting planted probably mid-April. So in mid-February, we've started seeding, which means we had potting soil delivered, which means we had seeds on time. We had trays ready to go. We had a greenhouse to grow them in. The soil got prepped with a tractor because, again, this is a bit larger of a scale. We were doing about 3/4 of an acre of onions in this picture. So all that got prepped with a tractor. We then used an implement to lay plastic, which we bought in from a larger order from a supply company. And then these are actually two employees who are here planting. So we need payroll. We need all like there. It's all the infrastructure that you need to support a farm crew as well. Kind of the picture next up to the right is the removal of all that plastic, which in and of itself, just for the onions for 4 people, there's 3 of us here and then one taking the picture. It took about 10 hours to do just the onions, again, which we use the tractor. There's a lot of labor involved in that. And again, you have to have access to the people who are going to do that. So this is probably a much larger scale than a lot of us would be looking at doing, and actually a scale that on my own farm we are getting away from. We have gotten a lot more intentional and a lot more efficient at using the space that we have. We're kind of closer to these other two pictures here where you can see in the lower picture, using a BCS, a walk-behind tractor, is probably the largest scale that we're going to be. So everything that we use that's powered is powered by this machine. It can run anything from a wood chipper and a log splitter all the way through to a generator or to anything you would ever need for bed prep or soil work. Again, on a small hand scale, at more than 2 to 3 acres, you probably should be looking at getting a tractor. And then the efficiencies here in the top right corner, the 3-way seeder. This is a high precision seeder. It makes seeding a lot of beds very quick. But this machine by itself, just the seeder, is close to $2,500, if not 3,000 at the moment. So it's pretty expensive. So again, you need to get to a certain scale. That's kind of the point of this slide, is that there's a certain scale that you need to get to start using some of these tools. So with homesteading, sometimes there's kind of this in-between area where we're too small to be a little farm, but we're too big to be or too big to be a little farm and too small to be a big farm. So this is kind of the scale that we need to look at as we're looking at our tools. They make a one row seeder, not a 3-way seeder. I have a 1-row seeder because we're not at a 3-row scale. The BCS, we have three of the 15 implements that they make because again, we're not at the scale or we don't need a lot of those things. And then getting away from the tractor is our next year. We will be completely tractor free, which we are very much looking forward to because all of those things just add in more and more complications to the farming process. So this is kind of as we switch, we've started making the transition to, this is again, pictures from my farm, to a more permanent raised bed system. A lot of compost, a lot of tarping. And that actually let us, by getting the tractor out of the way, help us scale up on a lot of those smaller scale production things. So the lettuce mixes, the romaines, the beets, the carrots. It was really once we got away from the tractor that we really got a lot more efficient at growing human food. Human food at a human scale are two things that should always go together. So kind of as we got away from that larger scale mindset where we were covering this whole field in plastic and tearing it up at the end of the year and paying people to do all that, we can now do that with a lot less work. And where our quality of produce has gone up exponentially since we got away from that tractor system. And yes, we do use BCS to form all of our beds. Whether it's the rotary plow on this top right picture, basically this field block had been tilled completely. Then it was rotary plowed. If you can see kind of these lower beds to the left, they're a little more narrow. So that was just the rotary plow throwing the soil sideways. And then this bed top here We've harrowed across the top and then covered with compost. And that's kind of our method for building these beds. And then as this compost gets worked in, even within a year, you'll start to see a change in the soil texture there as well, and kind of transitioning that land again over to a more permanent raised bed, like high functioning soil, where when we were on a full tillage tractor scale, we hadn't we couldn't pay that much attention to those details. Where now that we're in it every day, we're on the ground, we're walking through it, we're sticking our hands in. It's kind of just changed how we changed our relationship with the soil on our farm even. And the soil has improved, the vegetables have improved, the yields have improved. So this smaller scale, it's rather than scaling up, it's more duplicative. So instead of adding another field of instead of doing 1,000 foot row, I would add 10 50-foot field blocks. And probably get a higher yield out of less space using that system. But yeah, so tarping, hand tools, the BCS. Again, if you have a tractor, it's nice to have forks to pick things up and put things down, move soil around from place to place, pick up a bucket of leaves, things like that. But as far as like the actual growing, I think as a farmer, I didn't really get good at growing until I got more hand scale. So yeah, getting away from the tractor has been a push of mine for the last few years.
And when we look at this, this is not the scale that we are, of course, talking about or we are expecting to be operating here, especially for the purposes of today. Even though on a small scale, can you tell which one of these is a farm? Because one of these here did turn into this. It is a journey and it is an understanding. And part of that is learning that scalability and having this rigid framework is what is going to help create the success at any scale. Because you can't afford to have any inefficiencies, you can't afford to have any uncertainties when you have this scalability within your system. You know, um, First year of Blackbird Farms is down there in the bottom left, and to give it away, as a consultant, one of the reasons we're able to tell that right away is because you can see that outside of maybe the one in the bottom right, but you can see that there is a standardization here. Like there's an even spacing in row, there's an even spacing between rows, and of course, as Kegan said, that this was a learning curve and this was very much a growing curve, but this is more to reinforce the fact that at any scale, are you able to find your farming success?
And I will say this bottom left-hand picture, at the time we were growing in 12 35-foot beds. It's about an eighth of an acre if you include the pathways and the perimeter fence and all of that. And on that small eighth of an acre, those 12 35-foot beds, now those beds were flipped. They were planted to between 4 and 6 times that year, but we did a 10 family CSA farm share, kind of just come pick whatever you can't find. This was during the lockdown during COVID. So we kind of did like a U-pick family CSA and we did 10 families off of an eighth of an acre with plenty to spare. So kind of at the smallest scale, if you have, I mean, an eighth of an acre is like what 70 by 40 area, which is like a side yard for a lot of people. That was a 12 family CSA fairly easily. If you have your systems down, again, like Sage said, it was consistent spacing because this is how we cultivate, because this isn't just put it in the ground and let it grow like a home garden. We're being a lot more intentional about that. And because of that, you want to have some of these systems in place to make sure that you're able to do it quickly and efficiently without spending all of your time hand weeding because nobody has time for that.
Absolutely. Not even just standardization being one of the aspects that we really are trying to emphasize here. But when you look at these, the top center, that one was my garden the first year that I had any amount of space to put anything down. And we can go through the whole list of concerns or problems that happened that year, but this really just shows that there are a lot of pitfalls that you can be aware of that you will not or may not understand until you truly get here. In the picture prior, it's also the picture front and center here. thank you much to my assistant, who is, I believe, harvesting some cabbage there. But that's an example of I just got whatever transplants I could get a hold of, I would shove in the ground, and that in the front or in bottom center is Swiss chard, and it's okay, but that's about as far as I can take it with Swiss chard. And my neighbors weren't much of a fan either, so I completely grew out of context. But beyond that, there's so much more that we need to be aware of because we may not have the space. So we try to capitalize on it as much as we can, and we can run into problems such as overcrowding, like in the top left, which can exacerbate and continue more substantial problems like a pest or a disease that will stay in that soil and become a problem for years following, simply because we didn't give our space ourselves a system to allow our plants to thrive in a natural manner. But even beyond that, understanding that what we need is all we really wish to get. That on the top right was a uh, farm or homestead that I had the opportunity to visit, and it was a rough conversation because we went through all of the steps of those trellises were put up because we weren't anticipating as many tomatoes to be put in the ground as we were, but those tomatoes quickly got too heavy and crashed and cracked all of those trellises, and it just ended up being a huge waste of time, similar to like down in the bottom left where I planted some cover crop seeds only to have a flock of birds, starlings, I believe, come every morning and absolutely decimate it. Now I have a hodgepodge stand of cover crop trials. But even so, I wanted to emphasize this one because you can see that I have a small walk behind 1950 David Bradley tractor that, though this I am only farming 300 square feet, I purchased off of Facebook Marketplace for 150 bucks because the amount of time it takes me to go through and turn that soil under now is just going to be 2 to 5 minutes, when in comparison I can tell you that that was a full day job. I didn't need that type of investment, but understanding the efficiency that I am bringing to my system allows me to pursue my other endeavors. These are the things that we kind of need to be mindful of. It's not an immediate concern, but they will become a priority later on down the line.
And that,
Okay.
like we talked about in the beginning too, kind of the establishing your currency in that Sages is time. Again, we're small farms consultants. We also have farm operations on the side. So anything that saves us time is our currency, I think, in this world. So if that takes a half day job and turns it into a half-hour job, I don't care if it was for us. Again, the currency is time, not necessarily US dollars all the time. So yeah, $200 investment for something that's going to save us hours and hours over the course of the season is worth doing up front and not struggling through. Like Sage said, kind of this picture on the right, kind of don't half-ass any of it. If you're going to do it correctly. And it's a lot of those headaches can stem from uh, trying to do too much too soon, or even just plant things that no, you don't like. Grow things that you like because you're going to be excited about growing them. If you don't like them, you're probably gonna, those are going to be the things that get weedy. Those are going to be the things that get harvested last. Those are going to be the things that get attacked by pests. So grow the things you like at first, and it'll help you kind of at least orientate you in the right direction, but also kind of help you get those systems down.
And in part of those systems, something that is becoming more commonplace, I should say, on homesteads is some type of tunnel or season extension infrastructure. And with that, you have a lot of similar properties, but there are a few different aspects that we do need to be mindful of. Depending on the size, ventilation can be a huge concern. Anything above 50 square feet isn't able to passively ventilate. So being aware of the scale that you are operating in and making sure that you can build a system to support it is going to be the foremost important step in making sure that your tunnel system is able to be a successful system. Outside of that, you have your expected water, shade, temperature, pest, and disease. How that's going to be managed, though, is operationally identical outside of the infrastructure used to be able to forecast some of these concerns, I think is the safest way of putting it. No one here is going to be using a greenhouse, and if you are, please reach out to us because we're happy to help you. But all of the aspects that a greenhouse takes cares of or take care of, like you need to now incorporate in. How are you getting that ventilation? We're going to need to make sure that we have proper fans set up. How are you irrigating? Being mindful again of the same hurdles when it comes to your water, monitoring devices, which is something that isn't spoken about frequently, but can be used on any scale, of course. And then how we're going to be managing our crops, the fertility, their pest problems, and how are we going to be introducing that supplementation into the actual system itself. And keeping it clean, keeping it sanitary going to be an important uh is going to be one of the most like preliminary or primal factors or pillars, thank you, into like having a system that you're able to find as successful as these. So Kegan, if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like managing a greenhouse of this scale or a high tunnel of this scale, and some of the aspects that you were able to simply incorporate from a dolly system and your lean and lowers to being able to understand that having a system or a standardization for your pruning has been able to like build, help you build up your system for managing this greenhouse as passively as possible.
Yeah. So I'll start, I guess, with that middle picture, the top middle. This is earlier this spring. This was planted out into grafted heirloom tomatoes in the three middle rows, and then the shoulder rows are cucumbers. These are all done on the lean and lower trellis method. You can kind of see in the bottom left. Um, if you're not familiar with that, with grafting or with lean and lower, I think we have some webinars on that on the Rodale website. But also the lean and lower basically lets us take 2 liters and turn one tomato plant into two. And what we'll do is actually grow the indeterminates throughout the season and prune every leaf off from the last fruit set to the base. So these tomatoes, by the end of the year, right now, those tomatoes are about 15, 20 feet long, and been pruned and pruned, and we've harvested thousands of pounds out of there. That is a simple system. You can get these rollers online for about 75 cents a piece. And there's just some metal wire above our supports that hold them up. And as they get longer, you just extend the string and slide it down the wire. So it's a really simple, really efficient way to get a lot of production out of a small area, but also these tomatoes in a 24 by 48 greenhouse, we had over 400 tomato plants, all with a double liter, harvesting about 1 tomato off each per week. So it's a super productive space. It doesn't at any size. So even if you have a smaller structure, which I think we'll see on the next slide, this would still be possible. A lot of the especially winter production is this kind of lower center tunnel. And then top right is obviously transplant starts. And then the bottom right, something that I think a lot of beginning farmers overlook is a hardening off area for their transplants. You just spent months in some of these cases prepping them and getting them ready to go out into the field, but then they aren't hardened off properly. So you run into either that transplant shock or they just die completely. So having somewhere to acclimate your transplants to being outside, to being direct sun. Remember, if you have a greenhouse that is UV treated plastic, so they're not getting full sunlight even on the brightest of days. So making sure that there's at least a week of them to transition in and out of the controlled space into the outdoor world is super important to having really high quality plants. Also because if you put a weak plant into the ground, it will be the first one that gets attacked. So the stronger you can get your transplants, the healthier you can keep your area, the better off it'll be. So that's a big one and that's usually right outside of the greenhouse or the high tunnel. So that again, if you're in a scenario where this top left, if you have transplants growing inside, you could hand them right outside and just put them down and then bring them in at night and put them back out. So making sure that you have easy systems to do your transplants, your seed starts, but also a lot of vegetable production with the variability in weather right now for those high value crops or things you absolutely have to have or want to have. That cover growing space is going to be a must coming soon.
And as Kagan said, it doesn't need to be large. It can be at any scale here. Round number two, can you figure out which one of these is the farm? Uh, Spoiler alert, trick question. There was actually two. The top center and the top left are the caterpillar tunnels that were first utilized by Blackbird Farms. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can be what you're able to make it, or it can be something like a Costco greenhouse, similar to the ones in the bottom right. And investing a couple bucks in like a humidity and temperature sensor like this is going to be invaluable because what facilitates the poor health of a plant is the same thing that facilitates the health of a plant. It's just once you go beyond a specific threshold is when you create an environment for problems to arise. Humidity is important in a greenhouse, but once it gets too humid, you got a lot of problems. Temperature is important, but once it gets way too hot, your plants will go into heat dormancy. So understanding kind of not only your plant's limitations, but how you're able to passively like counter these within your high tunnel system or season extension system is going to be invaluable. And it can be done truly in an even more passive way. If room is even more confined to you, you can do so even in a cold frame. Similar, there's a lower and lean system that we were able to see that Kagan had mentioned just on a smaller scale. You don't need the investment of the rollers, but just an investment of two hooks and a metal pole and a metal string is going to be able to create the ventilation and airflow in your tomato plants that is going to help prevent the whitefly, the aphid, the disease pressure that is going to come at some point throughout the year. And this is something that we are not telling you to go out and buy or to go out and buy all of the caterpillars tunnels off of Farmer Friends. You can do this however you wish. Tables are not a cheap venture and they can be easily built effectively. Kegan, was this yours or a farm that you were able to visit that had actually built up their own season extension system?
On the bottom right
Uh,
is actually a greenhouse production where they have heated pipes. They're just hot water PEX tubing that they run underneath the soil, and then they'll seed these baby greens directly on top of that so they can grow all year and not heat the tunnel. They can heat the soil. Because a lot of these things like spinach and baby chard and baby mustards, they do really high value mix. Um, love that kind of growing where the soil is warm, the air is cool, and there are no pests. So that's a nice little like DIY one. But Sage, if we can go back a slide too, just wanted to touch on, so the top left and the top center are the same greenhouse, quote unquote. This is electrical conduit from Home Depot, um, and then covered in roofing plastic that we attached. We plugged in a regular home space heater and a bathroom vent fan that was connected to this humidity monitor. So if the humidity got too high, the fan kicked on. If the temperature got too low, the heater kicked on. And this whole greenhouse, you can see the cinder blocks there. We actually just laid boards on top of the cinder blocks, and now those were our tables. You don't want them on the ground. You want them elevated a little bit, but this whole greenhouse, including the Inkbird monitor, the plastic, the PVC, was probably under $200. It was definitely under $200 to build. It didn't do great in summer thunderstorms, but again, we kind of knew that coming into it. It wasn't meant to withstand a hurricane. It was just meant to get some transplants started. And that 10-person CSA that I talked about earlier, every transplant that we did that year came out of this little tunnel. So if you're looking at that just purely on a financial scale, I mean, a 10-person CSA, you're talking that's $5,000. We probably had over $10,000 worth of actual plants come out of this little $175 structure. So it doesn't have to be much to do a lot. But again, with that, every time it rained, we were running out to check on it. Every time there was a big windstorm, we were nervous. So there again, if time is your currency, maybe invest in something a little bit more rigid than this. But the goal is to just protect your plants. So if you can do that in a very simple way, we're all for that.
Absolutely. And that covers pretty much, I guess, Kegan and I's. I'm biased because I'm a bit of a veggie guy myself, but that covers my favorite part of the webinar. Now we're hopping over to the livestock aspects where animals are both much more complex and equally as simple at the same time, where in terms of what you need, the aspects are all going to be fairly straightforward. You're going to need appropriate housing throughout the entirety of the bird's life, feed, water and feed, nest boxes for your layers, and before you get into birds at all, you need to have a game plan as to how you're going to be processing, whether you're doing it yourself or hiring it out. Make sure you know and have built up that system prior. And some of these tools and what we're able to use, you have your PPE. Bird flu has been a thing, so it is good to be mindful as you're like walking between your flocks, or if you're going and seeing any of your neighbors' birds or anything like that, to have some booties on hand. And definitely, you're going to appreciate having a mask when it comes time to clean out your coop. Beyond that, some standard sanitation, have your scrubber brush ready on hand for your feeders and waterers as they get dirty. And of course, you're going to want to have a record log to make sure that you're able to categorize whatever is happening. I'm going to sound like a broken record because I would love to see this, and no matter what branch of your homestead you're going to. And if you really wish to push the performance of your animal, you can start to look at to what there is to help achieve that next level of health or performance. And for birds, for chickens, grit can absolutely do that. When we look at the commitment though of these type of operations, ultimately it comes down to how you have invested in your infrastructure is going to dictate the dedication. Of course, you can say that for every aspect, but it's going to be especially true when it comes to poultry, because whatever you are going to be moving or and how you are going to be moving it is going to be where that loss of time comes in. If you're going to be if you have 500 birds that you're going to want to process each year and you are hoping to move them out on a weekly basis and you have just as many as Joel does down in the bottom left, it's going to be a large commitment of time, 30 to 60 minutes, in order to just handle getting all these birds or handle all these responsibilities from replacing the feed, replacing the water, if there's any layers that you're handling, of course, finding and collecting the eggs, and then just moving the wiring itself is going to be the largest dedication. Beyond that, what hurdles you have, such as predator netting, can really kind of slow you down, if you will. But I do want to point out that like even with these larger pieces of infrastructure, you don't need to operate with that many birds. For instance, I want everyone to take a look down at the the true MVP of the webinar, Scout, down in the middle there. That's the dog. And the Suskovich A-frame behind it. There's not a lot of birds that are being maintained right now, but the infrastructure to efficiently do so is being utilized. That's what we're looking to kind of enforce here. But not only that, right above it, you see what is a waterer. You know, in terms of nutrient cycling and trying to capture the availability of whatever it is, uh, we are kind of following through with or trying to capture whatever nutrients are being made available by the birds. That's what I was trying to say. Watering in your manure after your birds are in an area is a great way to capture that excess ammonia. And that's something that I don't see a lot of individuals do. And if you want to try to break away from utilize your a dependency on fertilizer, this is a simple way to do so. Outside of that, you have your mechanisms in which you're going to feed. And of course, the more automated they're able to be, the easier it is for you to envelop other aspects of your operation. If we are looking to discuss kind of some of these scales, and as we are working our way down, I don't anticipate many people going beyond 500 birds. And if we're going to be doing about 500 birds, what could that look like for us? Well, you can get about 80 birds. You can safely get 80 birds in a Salatin style tractor if it's like a 10 by 12. So let's just bump it up to 15 because that'll give us 150 square feet and you need 1.5 square feet per bird. So we'll be able to do 5 pens of 100 birds each. And that gives us the capacity to, if we wanted to do them all in one run, be able to manage it. Or if we don't have the ability to process that much and we wanted to break it out, we can see how many runs we're able to do in a growing season. Here in central Pennsylvania, we can do about 5. So that could just be as simple as doing one run of 100 birds every 5 weeks, and you're able to process them as needed. Or if you're looking to do so um, through other means, such as automation, it really comes down to what works best for you and how you are looking to build out your actual operation. The creativity and the and how you are limited to building up your coop and your operation is stipend only by your operational, I guess, limitations. And I say that because we are, as homesteaders, we are trying to take advantage of all the space that we have, and chickens were originally jungle fowl that we domesticated. If you are able to find area that you or areas that you are not able to work through or get into with machinery, perhaps there's an opportunity for us to have some type of like silvipoultry in there. If you're looking to do so on a large scale, a great individual is Rehi Destry, I believe, out Tree Gen. Yeah, Tree Gen or Tree Range Birds.
Tree range.
Yeah, Tree Range Birds out of Wisconsin is doing wonderful work on that. And of course, you'll have like Salatin does the same stuff with hogs um, at a different scale as well. And as we kind of work our way down and we see what is a more individualist scale or more single family scale, we can still have quite a bit of effort involved. I would say about 125 birds is anticipated to be used by one family throughout the entire year. And that can be done with 2 style pens in one run, or that can be 3 Suchkovich A-frames. That A-frame on the right, that is the same dog, and that is the same A-frame because we didn't have or there wasn't the ability to utilize the equipment right away. But as it became available, we had no reason to scale or we had no reason to scale, but we had an opportunity to invest in efficiency, and that's exactly what we did. Not because we needed to, but because it just passively existed on the homestead. And of course, the most important part, before you have any of the fun of raising them, you got to figure out how you're taking them out. And what it really comes down to is there's nothing too special beyond the 3 pieces you see in the bottom left. Your plucker, your scolder, and your kill cones, all of which are able to be DIY'd in some way, as you're able to see in the top left. But you should have a processing facility kitted out in some regards akin to what you're able to see in the bottom right, where you have your freezer, you have the space, you have uh, acceptable drainage, you have a smooth flow of the order of operations as you process this bird. Like,
I will also say too, the regulations for what you are and aren't allowed to do or how much you're allowed to do will vary state by state. Where in Pennsylvania, you can slaughter up to 2,000 chickens a year on farm as whole freezer birds without a USDA inspection or certification. So that's going to vary state to state. There are some places in Pennsylvania that you can actually they can slaughter up to 300 broilers a day. They'll show up in a trailer where all of this is included, and then you pay them a per bird rate. Or again, if you're going to do it yourself, just making sure that you're aware of your local regulations to see what you can and can't do on farm. Because I think, at least in Pennsylvania, there's the right to farm law is pretty strong. So we have a lot more protections in the state of Pennsylvania than a lot of other growers do in other places. So just be aware of that, and hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised with what you're able to do by yourself.
absolutely. And then when we start to look at scaling up and managing larger forms of livestock like pigs here, there are some concerns that we do need to be mindful of because uh, as the aspects become fewer, those aspects become more significant in terms of making sure you have a system appropriate and is able to handle them. Hot wire being the most important for your pigs. In the state of Pennsylvania, if your hog gets out, The police are given the okay to shoot it on site, and you will be rewarded with a $10,000 fine. Not the most fun, and that is why it is important to make sure that each of these aspects is completely covered. Outside of that, you have your feed, your water, your shelter, and your shade. You don't need a lot to really maintain pigs. It's more so just maintaining the infrastructure that you are using for the pigs. And of course, a voltage tester will help. You can also use your hand if you want, but I cry easy, so I try to avoid that. If you have any amount of pigs, you got to figure out, though, how you're getting them on and off your farm and how they are going to be processed. Pigs are lovely, but they are not the most clean creatures, so you're going to need to make sure that you have your decaking tools and scrub brushes for handling um, their feeder and waterers. You don't need to call up a vet, but when you will need to call up a vet, you need to know that the vet you are calling is trusted and is able to help you. So having that information already uh, on hand is can make the difference between an animal's life or death. And as you're growing up in your operation, if anyone is interested in breeding their own animals, with that will come castration. So make sure that you have a system to do so. I'm not necessarily going to get into what is a scale of what is or isn't acceptable for breeding purposes, but just know that it's just another aspect you will have to handle. Of course, a record log and then some form of identification. Even for small herds, it's always good, but if you just want to say that one has two spots on the right and the other one just has one big one on the butt, that's totally okay. When it comes to looking at shelter, pardon me one moment, let me shut my door.
I can pick up there too. Yeah, looking at shelter, it can be kind of whatever fits on your farm. This top left picture is a picture of the Rodale hog facility, which is kind of a mixture of a production and a pastured system, where they have outdoor access to each one of these pens. Or again, if you're overwintering, you're going to want something a little sturdier where they can kind of hunker down and ride out bad weather. Or if you're just raising feeders, it could be as simple as just something out of the sun, something that's nice and soft and something that you can move. The pigs definitely they have to be protected from the sun, especially on those hot days. So making sure that they have enough access to water and to shade is a really big thing. But outside of that, I mean, this is T-posts and cattle panels with a tarp. So this is probably a $40 hog structure, and there's at least 10, 15 hogs in there. So it doesn't have to be super, super intense. But there are some basic needs that the pigs will have throughout all of the seasons. Sorry, Sage, I don't know if you had anything else on there.
No, no, absolutely appreciate it. Pardon. Sorry about that. My dog was barking. Apparently the mailman had arrived. With that though, there is also one important part with this is like when you are looking at pigs, it is not uncommon to hear that there are individuals that are able to like really encapsulate and use pigs as like a garbage collector, a nutrient cycler for whatever food waste is being generated on your homestead. And if that's the type of animal that you wish to raise, that is totally fine. But if this is something where you are looking to try and achieve quality meat, you need to understand that pigs are monogastrics. And with that, they need to have a complete feed that is fed to them because they are not able to get the needed amount of nutrition from just forages. I believe an appropriate ratio for like a forage fed pig is about 30% forages, 70% feed. So it's really hard to back away from that. You don't need to give the pig any feed, but if you don't, you are ultimately taking away from your end product. And when we look at containing or managing our pigs within an area, of course, that hot wire is going to be important. Most of these here, we're actually taking at Rodale, everything except the top right. We have our pigs that are rotated through our orchard at various times of the year. I believe that's the autumn and in the winter. And doing so really forced us to create a system that was able to handle any scale or any type of pig. And it was a learning curve, but we were able to to figure it out, and we haven't had many escaped barrows anytime soon. And also with that, we can look and we have a a actual stationary pasture, a permanent pasture that is connected to the former picture in the top left, which was our hog facility. And we can see here it's not your mobile fencing or electric insulated T-posts. Like this is a rigid structure. Both of them have the same obstacles, which is making sure it is live and making sure that it is appropriately set. If you know that you're going to have a paddock that is going to have a specific type of pig in it, such as feeders, understanding that you can set a electric fence at a height between their snout and eyebrows, at their standing height, because when pigs forage, they live with their noses down to the ground. That will hit their ears where they are most sensitive to the shock, and it's the easiest way to train them. If you are scaling and you have pigs of various sizes, of course, that's going to be harder to do, but just that is another way in which we can help maintain a more efficient system by knowing that we don't have to continue to alter fencing because we know the pigs that are coming here are all going to be uniformly the same and are all going to be able to be dressed with the same amount of with the same fencing, which they'll have to be regardless. And if you're looking on pasture, just understand that pigs on pasture are pigs on pasture, and they are not nice pigs, and they are not nice to the pasture. Uh, that's a nice Tamworth bull that we have in the top left, and it was just turned out to pasture as soon as the snow is melting, and you can already see the damage that it is doing. And that top right is actually a snapshot of the 8 acres that we have dedicated for our pasture, and you can see the damage that is being done to it. I believe that we actually reseed our pastures twice a year, and we can actually get in touch with Rick Carr, who's in charge of managing those operations, should you have any questions about that. Uh, and beyond that, you're also able to train your pigs, of course, to like a nipple feeder, just like a chicken, or uh, have some form of like bulk feeding. And this is where your decaking tools are going to be, because that gravity feeder is going to get muddy, it is going to get wet, and there are going to be maggots growing in it if you do not go out there and check. But when you're looking at pigs, ultimately it is just those three aspects. How are you going to feed them? How are you going to how are you going to provide them water? How are you going to keep it clean? And ultimately, how are you going to keep them in the same place? All of this, though, is meant to just provide some insight onto some of the needed efficiencies that a farm has to adapt to in order to be able to kind of manage their system. We are different. We aren't trying to do that. However, we are looking at this crossroads of efficiency versus efficiency, principles of production to enable longevity. I don't know a single homesteader that doesn't want to be here for the long run. And this is why we are here today to kind of talk about that, because there are some changes or some areas in which we have had to challenge a lot of the individuals that we've had the opportunity to work with who are homesteading. And that is ultimately because any organic farmer or any agrarian or homesteader is coming to the land with the same intentions. They wish to they wish to be a steward of the soil, and they wish to create and feed healthy food. However, the mindsets, and views that you have are completely different. With a homesteader, you're able to choose what you wish because you are the driving force for your operation, because what you wish to extract from it, what you want that value to be, is your own sense of fulfillment. With a farmer, though, you don't have that same flexibility. You are dictated to by the markets that you have created a plan to support. And that means that the customer many times is going to be the driving factor. And you need to have yourself set up in order to be able to handle and maximize the income that you're able to gain from that exchange. Most homesteaders are going to exist in like this gray area between these two, because though we are not trying to farm in a manner that is markets driven, being able to have that ability to switch that, or to flip that switch and pivot to a operation where you are able to generate capital, is ultimately what I would like everyone to have in a homestead, as a homestead needs to be able to support itself. And as we look to find that sweet spot between convenience and efficiency, We need to understand that like good enough is perfect and it's wonderful, but as we grow our dreams and as our idea of what we want from our homestead continues to develop, and as that goalpost continues to shift throughout our careers, we need to have the skills and ability to reevaluate old systems and augment what is needed in order for us to extract what we need most of, which is more time. One way I always like to kind of explain this idea is you have your balloon, and your balloon is your homestead or farm. And as you blow into it, you are putting your time, your energy, your resources into it because it is your passion. And you blow and you blow and you blow, and this balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it gets to a point where it gets harder to blow into it because you are at capacity. And what's going to happen when that balloon gets too big? It is going to burst. And what does that burst look like? That could be an animal dying. That could be a crop failure. That could getting to a point where you think homesteading or farming isn't for you. And that's the unfortunate reality that can happen when people are faced with these failures. So doing what you can to prevent these hardships that will inevitably arise is is what will create a solid system. And this is kind of what we're harping on. This is the meat and potatoes of this presentation right here in terms of the ways in which we can see homesteaders kind of pivoting, shifting your mindset and understanding that this is something that yes, you are doing for yourself, but this is something that you need to be able to do and develop and handle both in the short and long term. And with that, you will need to be gaining transparency, and that transparency comes in different forms. Financial transparency as you grow out your operation, figuring out what it is that you wish to do, and then growing up your operation as you've kind of reached that time cap and you need to go back and readdress and refine your system. And there's ways to do that, such as canvassing, which is more of a business aspect that we're going to be getting into. But don't be afraid, because what it's ultimately here to do is to help show the kinks in your armor or the weak points in your system. That way, when we are looking to make an investment, we are making the most informed decision possible. And when we make those informed decisions, what do we get back most? Time. As you keep those records, as you have an understanding of where your system is and where you're going and where your strengths and weaknesses are, which is only something you're able to do as you collect this data, you're able to kind of see what you are and are not able to take on. Maintaining direction is hard for us to do, and keeping these blinders on is something that you must. Okay, I need to say no. I'm sure everyone has to say no, probably to ourselves more than anyone else, because we want to take on more than we are like able to handle because we're gluttons for punishment. You know? But that there is value in being able to understand and looking at something and saying that I have interest in this pursuit, but I need to hold off on this because I am looking at a different endeavor right now. And you only can really do that when you have spent some time and forecasted what this plan for your operation will be. And for anyone that is not uh, actively homesteading, or you may not have land right now, I want you to realize that homesteading doesn't mean that you need land. And if you are looking to acquire land, that doesn't mean that you need to buy it, because buying land means that you are indebted to the land. There are opportunities to try and exist in some type of less traditional way to acquire land, whether that be some type of lease agreement, where you have a neighbor or fellow farmer that has additional acreage that they wouldn't mind giving up in exchange for some additional labor, some crops, or otherwise, and that can also be a type of land bargain. Uh, this is becoming more and more prominent. Kagan, I know you have some experience with alternative ways of utilizing and finding land as well.
And yeah, not restricting yourself to necessarily getting stuck in the normal, I have to find somewhere that I can buy and live on and do all of the things. Sometimes we're in the process of moving my own farm to a college campus where we are simply renting land from the college. We aren't the college's farmer. We aren't beholden to the college in any way outside of a wholesale relationship with the culinary school. But yeah, kind of getting creative with your land access. And even with that, I have a 10-year lease for my land. So I am renting, but I feel like I have some long-term security there to kind of build up the systems and make the investments that I would want to make into a place that I'm going to be farming regularly. So whether it's calling an institution, whether it's reaching out to a neighbor, I know farms that have started by medicinal herb farmer that I work with cold called a conventional farmer down the street and said, "What 5 acres do you hate to drive your combine through?" And he rented it to her for almost nothing. She started her business, wrote a business plan, redid the business, bought the land, and kind of leveled up repeatedly, and is one of the best medicinal herb growers in the country. So yeah, get creative with how you find land. Don't get too stuck into to buying your own land, and also make sure you have an assessment of actually going through this. Having that assessment made me realize that I don't want to live on my farm. I need some separation between home and field work for my sanity and for my family's sanity. So being aware of just kind of your own internal operations as well, and how that fits into your choice of land access. But don't limit yourself to the more standard ways of finding land. Don't be afraid to get creative.
And when it comes to leveling up your operation, there's a lot of tools that we're able to utilize here. This is going to be a business canvas. Hold up, these are intentionally blanked out for a reason because as a homesteader, we actually have most of our homework already filled out for us. Ultimately, what I want us to look at is this top or is this left section, the can you grow it? Because I want you to start thinking through the process. Key partners, who are you, what are you doing, or what are you doing? How are you doing? And who are you working with in order to make it happen? Key partners is who are you working with? Are you growing your own seed? Are you buying in your own seed? If you're buying it in, are you also buying in fertilizer? Are you a closed herd or are you bringing in chicks? Who must you work with in order to have your key activities or operations, what you are doing, thrive? And outside of those key activities, which is just the operational aspects of what you have to do for your particular endeavor, what are the resources that you're going to need to do it? I'm farming and I want to farm a 4,000 square foot garden. I know that I'm going to need my cultivation tools. I know that I'm going to need my fertility plan, and I know that I'm going to need to source my seed. Outside of this, outside of these problems, we as homesteaders don't really have much else because how are we using it? Well, we can answer that. You know, we are using it. And if we're not using it, well, then we can actually flesh this out and it becomes a sales channel. But we are going to be using it. And if not, we are sharing it. And that is exactly what we want. That cost and value of production, though, at the bottom is really what I think can provide some additional value to us because we are able to see or we are forced to list out and categorize all of the expenditures that we're going to be running into here. So this is where, as a business canvas, and we fill out each section, we're able to start to see, have we thought through the whole process? Like, am I prepared to transport these pigs? Am I ready to process these chickens? I am currently farming this garden and I wish I had 8 more hours a week so I was able to start managing some broilers. What could I do to reevaluate myself? A business canvas is meant to force you to kind of identify some of these areas. But ultimately, with homesteading, like we are not here to commercialize it. We are here to show you that there's areas that are worth some additional emphasis because what is it that a homesteader cannot grow on trees? There's actually two answers here. Money, the obvious, and time. And some of these efficiencies that have been that we have been trying to show you at scale can be incorporated very easily into your system, and that's what we are here to try and do. You know, because when you have that scalability, you have definition. And when you have that definition, there's comfort in it. And when you are able to be comfort and are comfortable in what you're doing, you're able to find that success. And that's really what we're aspiring for here. You know, efficiency is just a tool for us as a homesteader, for us to exist within the natural order of our own operation. Don't be afraid of it. Don't look at it as we're trying to overcapitalize and invest, but rather we're trying to invest in a manner that will allow us to pursue this far into the future.
I think we have a couple minutes if we have any more questions that want to come in.
Yeah, one
Mm,
more question in the chat from Jeremy. He's got a 26 horsepower tractor and was curious if you had any suggestions for making beds with 3-point hitch equipment.
They actually make it's some people call it a plastic layer or a bed shaper. That's actually what we use to put down the plastic in the pictures before. But that is all 3-point hitch. You don't need a PTO. You don't need hydraulic for the base model. Yeah, a plastic layer is typically what they're called. But yeah, that is all 3-point hitch driven. Make sure you get your soil worked if you're going to be pulling it with 26 horsepower, but that should be fine. And that's actually, I think that might be the size tractor that we laid that plastic with too. So yeah, no, I'll get a plastic layer and do that.
Perfect, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Here's Kegan and I's contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We're happy to entertain and answer any questions that you may have. And should you wish to have this PowerPoint, you are more than welcome to. Please just feel free to touch base with me. And have no problem sharing it.
Also, all the webinars will get posted to the Rodale website, so feel free to check this and all the other webinars that we do. Actually, our coworker is doing another one as we speak, so there's always a lot of information coming out. So just stay on top of that as well. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you much.